Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'll talk about the HOA, which requires me not to buy what I want. The afternoon my homeowners association tried to fine me $1,000 a day for thinking about buying a house I didn't even own yet. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, stirring pasta, and trying to decide if I was finally becoming one of those adults who talked about interest rates for fun. I'd just gotten off the phone with my mom. She'd been talking in that too bright way she does when she's hiding how scared she is. "We're fine, sweetheart," she said. "The stairs aren't that bad. Your dad just has to take them slow now. You know him. He jokes with every step. 1, 2, orthopedic." She laughed, but it broke in the middle. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac of beige townhomes and identical mailboxes, run by a very proud, very enthusiastic HOA. My place is on the outer curve. Directly next door, sharing a property line but technically in a different subdivision, is an older single-story ranch house with a blue front door and a giant oak tree. That house does not belong to our HOA, not on paper, not in the deed, not in reality. The only reason I know that is because I read my closing documents when I bought my townhome, and I'm strangely fond of fine print. The listing agent at the time had pointed next door and said, "Those are county only, no association." She said it like she was warning me, but I filed it away as interesting. For years, the ranch house belonged to a sweet older guy named Mr. Bowden. He'd wave from his porch swing and hand out full-size candy bars on Halloween. Then he passed away, and the place sat empty for months, the lawn going shaggy and the porch light permanently off. One morning on my way to work, I saw it. A big white for sale sign stuck in the front yard of the blue-doored house. And I stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. I know this sounds dramatic, but something in my brain clicked into place at that exact second. My parents are in their late 60s. Their split level out in the suburbs is getting harder for them to manage. I'm an only child. I've done well in my career, and I've been responsible with money. And here, 15 feet from my kitchen window, was a single-story house with a big tree and a yard that could easily fit a ramp and some raised garden beds. It was like the universe had dropped a puzzle piece with my name on it. I pulled out my phone on the spot and called the listing agent. By that weekend, I was walking through the empty rooms, breathing in that stale, old people and dust smell, imagining my mom's Afghans on the sofa and my dad complaining about the cable remote from the recliner. The house needed work. New roof, updated wiring, a kitchen that didn't look like a museum to beige laminate. But structurally, it was solid, priced fairly, and, most importantly, completely separate from my HOA, or so I thought. I made an offer. The seller's niece accepted with only minor negotiation. My mortgage broker ran numbers that made my stomach flutter, but still landed squarely in responsible but ambitious. We opened escrow. I don't know how the HOA found out. Maybe the listing agent mentioned my name in passing to someone who lived on my street. Maybe one of my neighbors saw me walking with a clipboard and a tape measure. Or maybe the universe just hates neat plans. It started with an email. The subject line was, "Urgent, clarification needed regarding neighboring property." It was from our HOA president, a woman named Clarabelle who had the energy of a substitute teacher who actually likes giving pop quizzes. When she moved in, she introduced herself with a printout of the community rules and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I opened it, confident it was something mundane like trash pickup changing by 10 minutes. Instead, I read, "Dear resident, it has come to the board's attention that you may be in the process of purchasing the neighboring property at address. We need to make absolutely clear that this property is not presently part of our association. The board has grave concerns about an association member owning a non-association property immediately adjacent to their existing home. This presents a conflict with our community standards and precedents. You are hereby informed that the board will consider any purchase of this property by you to be a violation of our governing documents and a threat to community cohesion. Should you proceed, your monthly assessment will be increased by $1,000 per day of continued non-compliance until the matter is resolved or you relinquish interest in the property. We expect your written confirmation within 48 hours that you will not be pursuing this purchase. Respectfully, Clarabelle. President, Community Name Homeowners Association." I read it 3 times thinking I had to be misunderstanding something. First, they absolutely did not have the authority to tell me what I could or couldn't buy, especially off their own platted area. Second, $1,000 per day wasn't a typo, it was in bold. Third, threat to community cohesion made it sound like buying a house was the same as starting a backyard fireworks factory. I laughed out loud, partly because it was so outrageous and partly because that's my default when I'm furious and don't know what to do. Then I read it again, very slowly, and that laugh drained out. I work in data analytics, not law, but even I know property rights aren't determined by a volunteer board with a bank account. I tapped out a reply before my brain could talk my fingers out of it. Hi Clarabelle, thanks for the email. To clarify, I am under contract to purchase the property next door. As you noted, it is not part of the association and is not subject to association covenants. My understanding is that the HOA cannot regulate my purchase of a separate property not governed by the HOA. I also understand that assessments can't be arbitrarily increased outside the process described in the CC and Rs. Can you please point me to the specific section of the governing documents that gives the board authority to regulate a member's purchase of non-association property and levy a $1,000 day increase in assessments? I want to make sure I'm not missing something. Best Elias. I hit send. The noodles boiled over while I was rereading the HOA's email, so I ended up eating slightly gluey pasta, staring at my laptop, wondering how weird my life had just become. The next morning, instead of an email, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, there was Clarabelle, flanked by our treasurer, a guy named Nolan who always wore golf shirts, and another board member, a retired teacher named Doria, who took pictures of recycle bins that weren't fully closed. They looked like they were there to sell me cookies, except they were holding a manila folder instead of a box. Elias, Clarabelle chirped, we really need to talk about this little situation. I stepped back and gestured them in because I wanted this on my turf, literally and figuratively. Also because my Ring camera doesn't pick up audio clearly, and I had a feeling I wanted witnesses. They perched on my bar stools while I made coffee I didn't want. Nolan set the folder down like it was a subpoena. So, I said, leaning on the counter, what's up? Clarabelle clasped her hands together. We got your email, and I thought it would be better to address this face-to-face so nothing is misinterpreted. Tone can be so tricky over email. Agreed, I said. So help me understand the part where my assessments go up $1,000 a day. She didn't even blink. Right. So, our community is built on consistent standards. That's what keeps property values up and ensures everyone enjoys a harmonious environment. When one owner holds property that is not subject to our standards, especially adjacent property, it creates an incentive to ignore our rules. People start doing whatever they want on the non-association lot, and then it spills over. It's a slippery slope. I looked at her. I'm not planning on starting a junkyard if that's what you're worried about. I want my parents close to me. That's literally it, Doria chimed in. But dear, we don't know what might happen in the future. What if your parents, heaven forbid, pass on and you rent it out? We've worked very hard to avoid renters here. That's not even remotely legal, I thought, feeling my jaw tighten. Nolan cleared his throat. We checked with our resources. He said it with the confidence of someone who'd once called a cousin who knew a paralegal. We can absolutely structure assessments for members based on the burden they place on the community. If you choose to create a two-house situation that undermines cohesion, that increases our administrative burden. So the $1,000 per day is to encourage a quick resolution. I stared at him. You can't fine me for buying a house that isn't under your authority. And you definitely can't hike my dues without a community vote. It's in the documents. Clarabelle's smile thinned. We think you're focusing too much on technicalities and not enough on what's best for everyone. Look around you. She gestured toward the window, where our rows of identical units stretched neatly down the curve. This neighborhood works because we all agree to play by the same rules. Except the blue house never agreed to your rules, I said. And neither did any person who buys it, including me. She exchanged a quick look with Nolan. We're trying to avoid a situation where we have no choice but to place liens on your current property. That's the last thing we want. But we will if we have to. The letter was a courtesy. Doria nodded solemnly. We like you, Elias. You're quiet. You bring your trash cans in on time. We don't want this to become adversarial. My stomach did a weird swoop. Not because I thought they could legally do what they were threatening, but because they clearly believed they could. And I'd seen them steamroll people before. A year earlier, they'd gone after an elderly resident down the street, a widow named Missy, because her grown son had moved in with her after a divorce and dared to park his old pickup in the guest lot. Too many nights in a row. They'd sent her a string of notices with words like legal action and privileges suspended. And she'd cried on her porch while they took photos of the truck like it was contraband. I'd helped him figure out how to park on the adjacent public street and avoid their guest lot rules. But the whole thing had left a bad taste in my mouth. Looking at them now, it clicked. They were used to people folding. "Let me make sure we're all on the same page," I said. "You're telling me that if I buy a single-family house next door that you don't govern, you're going to fine me $1,000 a day via increased assessments on my current unit until I sell it or give up the purchase?" "Yes," Clarabelle said, as if explaining the concept of a late fee. "We're prepared to vote to adopt a special assessment schedule just for this scenario. It's in the community's best interest. And if I don't pay that?" Nolan shrugged. "Then we follow our collection procedures: late fees, interest, lien, potential foreclosure. You know the drill. Nobody wants that." I let a beat of silence stretch long enough that Nolan shifted in his seat. "Okay," I said finally. "Then I guess we're going to have to see what the law says about all that." Clarabelle's jaw tightened. "We are the law as far as this community is concerned." I laughed once, short and incredulous. "No, you're really not." Something in my voice must have hit a nerve because Clarabelle stood up, smoothing her cardigan. "We really hoped you would be reasonable. You have 48 hours to send us written confirmation that you are withdrawing from the purchase. After that, the new assessment schedule begins." Doria added, "We're only this firm because we care. You'll thank us when we keep out the wrong element." "The wrong element?" I repeated. "You know," she said vaguely, as if I should. They left in a little swirl of offended politeness, crossing my driveway back toward their identical garages like they owned the asphalt. I shut the door gently because I've learned that slamming is satisfying for about 2 seconds and then makes you feel silly. Then I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and did what anyone under 40 does when threatened. I started researching like my life depended on it. First, I pulled up my HOA's CC and Rs from the folder I'd stuffed in a drawer when I moved in. I read them cover to cover, highlighter in hand. I am not exaggerating when I say that was more painful than reading my old college statistics textbook. But anger is a great focusing tool. I found the section on assessments. It said the board could raise regular dues by up to a certain percentage annually without a membership vote, and anything above that required approval of a majority of owners. It also said special assessments had to be tied to actual budgetary needs, like capital improvements or emergency repairs. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, about fines for owning non-HOA property or individualized dues hikes based on the board's feelings. The enforcement section talked about fines for violations of rules, painting your house neon, leaving junk in common areas, that sort of thing. But even those had to follow a written notice and hearing process, and the fines had to be reasonable in relation to the violation. I grabbed a legal pad and started taking notes, writing down section numbers and bullet points. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how to break down a document, and my day job has trained me to notice when numbers don't add up. Then I opened a new browser tab and started searching for state laws on HOAs and assessment increases. It turns out, my state has an entire section of its civil code devoted to common interest developments. It was dry reading, but clear enough. Boards can't just invent penalties out of nowhere, and they definitely can't impose special assessments as punishment for things they don't like that have nothing to do with the association. I found a few horror stories of people whose HOAs had gone rogue and how they'd fought back. Most of the advice boiled down to 3 things. Document everything, don't ignore threats, and if it gets serious, get a real attorney, not just my cousin who once took a paralegal class. I was halfway through an article about overreaching boards when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor on the other side, a nurse named Raya who worked night shifts and had a front-row view to HOA nonsense. Raya: "Why were the 3 musketeers marching away from your place looking like they ate a lemon?" Me: "They tried to tell me I'm not allowed to buy the house next door." Raya: "What?" Me: "And they say they'll raise my dues $1,000 a day if I do." There was a long pause, then Raya: "Stop, no way, even for them that's wild." Me: "Want to come over and see the letter?" She did. 10 minutes later, we were at my kitchen table, my docs spread out, her in scrubs with a coffee the size of her head. Raya read the email, then the notes I'd scribbled from the CC and Rs. "They can't do this," she said, shaking her head. "I've worked ER. I've seen some bold nonsense. This is up there." "They seem pretty convinced they can," I said. They threatened liens on Missy for that truck too." Raya said. "But that was actual parking policy. This is just them being controlling." I chewed on my lip. "I'm under contract. If I back out now without a legal reason, I lose my earnest money and I look like a flake. And my parents, they're already picturing themselves in that house." "Do they know about this?" she asked. "Not yet. I didn't want to freak them out before I knew what I was dealing with." Raya leaned back. "So what are you going to do?" I looked down at my notes, at my highlighter, at the email threatening $1,000 a day because I wanted to take care of my parents. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to buy the house, and I'm going to make them regret ever putting that number in writing." Raya's eyes lit up. "Do you need a witness for anything? Because I am so in." The next day, I took a longer lunch break than usual and called a real attorney. Not a friend of a friend. An actual homeowner association lawyer whose website had testimonials from people who looked like they'd aged 10 years dealing with boards. I scheduled a consultation. It wasn't cheap, but the $1,000-a-day email was still fresh in my memory, and I figured paying someone who actually passed the bar was preferable to trying to wing it. In the meantime, the HOA escalated. They sent another email, this time to the entire community. "Dear residents, it has come to the board's attention that an owner is considering activities that may significantly disrupt our community standards and harmony. While we do not wish to name the resident at this time, we feel it is important to keep you informed. The board is exploring all available options to maintain our neighborhood's integrity, including special assessment structures to address any increased administrative and legal burden imposed by individual actions that are contrary to the spirit of our covenants. We appreciate owners who have already reached out expressing concern about potential non-compliant uses of neighboring properties. Rest assured, we are committed to protecting our shared investment. Respectfully, the board." It was vague enough not to mention me, but everyone knew. My street is quiet. News moves fast. By evening, I'd gotten 3 texts and 1 awkward driveway conversation with a neighbor who said, "I'm sure you have your reasons, but they're just trying to keep the neighborhood nice." I responded with something neutral because I've learned that people's opinions morph once they know all the facts, and I didn't want to have the whole argument on the sidewalk. Then I got a voicemail from Clarabelle, her voice sugary but with steel underneath. "Hi Elias, it's Clarabelle. I just wanted to follow up on our conversation. The board met last night and voted to approve the special assessment structure we discussed. It will take effect in, another 24 hours if we haven't received your withdrawal confirmation. I would hate for you to incur unnecessary charges. Please call me back so we can resolve this amicably." Unnecessary charges, like she was talking about late library books, not trying to extort me out of a lawful purchase. The consultation with the lawyer, whose name was Devin, turned out to be one of the most satisfying phone calls of my life. I emailed him copies of everything: the HOA letter, my CC&Rs, the threatening voicemail, which I'd saved and forwarded, plus a summary of the in-person conversation with the 3 musketeers. He called me back the next afternoon. "So," he said after the introductions, "I read the documents you sent. I'm going to be blunt. This board is out of line. Wildly." "That's what I thought," I said, relief loosening something in my chest. "In this state," he continued, "assessments have to be levied according to the governing documents and the civil code. A board cannot use assessments as a punishment tool unrelated to actual association expenses. They especially cannot increase one owner's assessments by an arbitrary amount without following the proper procedure, which, according to your CC&Rs, involves a membership vote for anything above a small percentage increase. They also can't regulate your use or ownership of property that's outside the association's platted boundaries. So all that stuff about $1,000 a day is nonsense," he said. "If they actually tried to put that on your ledger and collect, they'd be opening themselves up to a world of hurt. Fines and penalties have to be reasonable and related to actual violations." I told him about the threats of liens and foreclosure. Devin made a thoughtful sound. "Some HOAs bluff, assuming owners don't know their rights. Sometimes it works, sometimes it blows up. I'd be happy to send them a letter explaining the law in very simple terms. That might head this off early." "What would that cost?" I asked, bracing for the number. He told me. It wasn't pocket change, but it was less than a week of the imaginary fines they were trying to scare me with. "Do it," I said. "And can I ask something else?" "Of course." "If they've done this to me, what are the odds this isn't the first time they've overstepped?" He chuckled softly. "In my experience, let's just say where there's smoke, there's usually a board member with a personal agenda. But one thing at a time. First, we tell them to back off your purchase. Then, if you want to dig deeper, we can talk strategy. We hung up with a plan. He'd draft a cease and desist style letter to the HOA copying me. It would lay out in polite but firm language that they had no authority over my potential ownership of a non-association property. Their proposed special assessment was illegal. Any attempt to impose or collect such assessments could result in legal action against the association and potentially individual board members if they acted outside their authority. He said he'd also request copies of their minutes and financials related to the supposed vote about the special assessment, along with any policy they thought supported it. Boards hate turning over documents, he said, but they're required to when an owner requests them. Their reaction will tell us a lot. That night, for the first time since the whole thing started, I slept more than 4 hours. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw someone standing in the overgrown yard of the blue house next door. A woman, maybe in her 50s, in a worn denim jacket, looking up at the oak tree with a sad little smile. "Hi," I called over the low fence. "You must be family." She turned, startled, then relaxed. "Niece," she said. "Well, great niece. I'm here to check on some junk in the garage. You live next door?" "Yeah, I'm Elias." She introduced herself as Kayla and we chatted for a minute. I told her I was under contract to buy the house and her face lit up. My great-uncle would have loved that. He always said this street had good people. He hated the idea of an investor scooping it up and turning it into some kind of party place. "So I'm really glad it's you." I almost laughed at the idea of my parents, who go to bed at 9, running a party place. "Actually," I said, "I'm buying it so my folks can move closer. They're getting older. I want them nearby." Her eyes got a little shiny. That's really nice. My mom could have used that kind of help." She was stubborn, though. She hesitated. "Listen, I don't want to overstep, but if those HOA people give you trouble, my uncle always said they were busybodies. He had some interesting stories. Check the file cabinet in the back room closet. There should be a folder labeled Association Nonsense." I raised my eyebrows. "Seriously?" "Seriously," she said. "I don't know what's in it, but he kept it for a reason. It felt like a side quest in a video game. Find the hidden folder of Association Nonsense." I thanked her and headed to work with a strange mix of dread and excitement humming under my ribs. By mid-afternoon, Devin had emailed me a copy of the letter he'd sent the HOA. It was a thing of beauty, calm, professional, and devastating. He quoted specific paragraphs of the CC&Rs and state law, explained why their threat was illegal, and gave them 10 days to provide written confirmation that they would not attempt to impose any special assessment or penalties related to my purchase of the neighboring property. He also made a formal records request for their board meeting minutes and financials concerning any discussion of such assessments. He ended with a polite line that made me grin. "My client is prepared to vigorously defend his statutory and contractual rights should this matter not be resolved promptly." An hour later, I got an email from Clarabelle. "Elias, we are in receipt of a communication from someone claiming to represent you. We are reviewing it with our own resources. In the meantime, you should know that involving outside parties only increases the burden on the association, which will have to be recouped somehow. We had hoped to resolve this neighbor to neighbor. Sincerely, Clarabelle." I showed that to Devin, who replied, "They're rattled. Good." 2 days later, a notice went up on the community bulletin board by the mailboxes. It was printed in thick black font. Notice of special board meeting. The board will convene an emergency session to discuss recent challenges to our authority and legal options to protect the community. Due to sensitive legal matters, this meeting will be closed to owners. Date 2 days from now. Time 7 p.m. Location President's Unit. As I stood there reading it, someone stepped up next to me. It was Missy, the widow with the pickup truck son. "You the challenge?" she asked, her voice dry like dust. "Apparently," I said. She nodded. "Good. Someone needed to. Those people think this place is their personal kingdom." "You had trouble with them too, right?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. She snorted. "You mean besides them taking photos of my front porch like they're from a magazine? They tried to fine me for the railing my son installed after I slipped on the stairs. Said it wasn't approved. That little rail probably saved my hip. I thought of my parents, my dad's careful way of walking downstairs now, one hand on the wall. "I'm sorry," I said. "That's ridiculous." "You know what changed their tune?" she asked. I shook my head. "My son told them he was going to call a lawyer and the local paper. Suddenly the rail was grandfathered." She eyed me. "Sometimes people like that only understand a bigger stick." I walked home thinking, okay, bigger stick, I can do that. That night, I went over to the Blue House with the temporary key the title company had given me to take measurements and photos for the contractor I'd been talking to. The sun was setting, turning the oak's leaves red gold. Inside, the house smelled like old books. The carpets were worn, but the bones were good. In the back bedroom closet, just like Kayla said, there was a file cabinet. The bottom drawer stuck, but I yanked it open with a grunt. Inside were neatly labeled folders: insurance, taxes, pensions. And there, near the back, HOA misc nonsense. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the faded carpet, and started reading by the light of my phone. There were letters, so many letters. Apparently years ago, long before I lived on the cul-de-sac, the HOA had tried to annex the Blue House and a few other older properties on our street, claiming it would simplify maintenance and extend community benefits. They'd mailed out packets proposing new covenants and monthly dues. Mr. Bowden had written back, very politely, declining. He'd underlined the part of his original deed that said, "No association." The HOA had sent follow-up letters, increasingly insistent. They'd suggested that if the older properties didn't join voluntarily, the board might seek a legal remedy to ensure uniformity. There were hand-scribbled notes on some of the letters in Mr. Bowden's shaky handwriting. Not enforceable. Lawyer says they're bluffing. Then there was a letter from a law firm addressed to the HOA, copying Mr. Bowden and a few other non-HOA owners. It basically said in formal legalese, "Cut it out. You have no authority over these parcels." The last letter in the folder was from the association, backing off. After careful consideration, the board has decided not to pursue annexation at this time. I sat there on the carpet, file in my lap, and realized they had lost this exact battle once already. Different house, different owner, same grab for control. And now they were trying to use me to get a second shot. Something cold and determined settled in me. They weren't just being overcautious busybodies. They were trying to reach past the boundary of their little kingdom and pull in anything they could. I took photos of everything in the folder and emailed them to Devin with the subject line, "You're going to love this." By the time the emergency board meeting rolled around 2 days later, word had spread that I'd hired a lawyer and that the Blue House had history with the HOA. You could feel the tension in the air. People were watering their lawns a little slower, taking a little longer to check mail, walking past Clarabelle's unit more than once like they might overhear something. Rhea came over that evening with popcorn like we were about to watch a movie. "You know this meeting is illegal, right?" she said, dropping onto my couch. "They can't just have secret sessions whenever they feel like it." Devin said as long as they're not voting on certain things, they can have closed sessions, I said. "But they still have to keep minutes and share them if we ask." "Do you think they know that?" she asked. I thought of Clarabelle waving away technicalities, Nolan talking about burdens, Doria fretting about the wrong element. I'm not sure they know half the rules they're supposed to follow. We sat there in my living room. My window cracked open just enough to let in the murmur of voices from 2 doors down, the low rise and fall of people who thought they were having a private conversation. I couldn't make out words, just tones. Clarabelle's crisp, Nolan's more muted, someone else a little panicked. I didn't need to hear details. I already knew where this was heading. They were not going to back down easily, and they were going to double down. And I was very, very done letting them push people around. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Devin with the subject line, "Update." They blinked, a little. I opened it before I even put on my glasses. He'd forwarded me a response from the HOA's attorney, a real law firm this time, not our cousin who once took a class. The letter was short, cautious, and clearly annoyed that they'd been dragged into something that should never have left a kitchen table. It said in very careful language that the association did not intend to impose an assessment of $1,000 per day, merely to communicate the potential financial impact of my choices. It also said that any changes to assessments would, of course, be made in compliance with governing documents and applicable law. They stopped short of an apology. They definitely stopped short of saying, "Yeah, we tried to scare him and got called on it." Devin's note underneath said, "They're trying to walk this back without admitting fault." Classic. I typed back, "So they're not going to try it?" He replied a few minutes later. I wouldn't bet on them being that wise, but they know we're watching. Also, I read the association nonsense folder. Your neighbor was a rock star. He called me on my lunch break. "So here's how I see it," he said. "The threat alone is probably enough for a claim. interference, possible breach of their fiduciary duty to you as a member, especially now that we know they've tried something similar in the past. But we don't need to rush to court. Let's give them a chance to hang themselves a little more. Keep documenting." "I can do that," I said. "And in the meantime, close on that house," he added. "As far as the law is concerned, this association has nothing to do with it." That phrase, "nothing to do with it," felt like oxygen. A week later, I sat at a title company office with a pen in hand, signing my name so many times it stopped looking like letters. Kayla sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, smiling in this tired, relieved way. "Uncle would be happy," she said. "He didn't like that association. Told me they tried to push him around. He got them to back off once," I said. "I'm trying to follow in his footsteps." We finished the stack of papers. The escrow officer slid a folder toward me, and just like that, I owned 2 properties. One inside the HOA, one deliberately, gloriously outside. When I walked out into the parking lot, there was a voicemail waiting on my phone from an unknown number. I hit play. "Hello, this message is for Elias. This is Gerald from the Department of Community Housing and Development's Common Interest Communities Division. We received your online complaint regarding your homeowners association and some potentially unlawful assessment threats. I'd like to get some more information and copies of the documents you referenced. Please give me a call back." I'd filed that complaint late one night after reading yet another story of someone who didn't realize there were state agencies for this stuff. I honestly hadn't expected anything to happen quickly, if at all. I called him back from my car. "Thanks for getting back to us so fast," he said after we confirmed my identity. "I've read your summary. The threat of $1,000 a day. Is that in writing?" "Yes," I said. "I can email you the letter and the voicemail." Gerald from the state office listened to my whole story, then said, "We do have authority to investigate associations that appear to be violating the civil code." I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in days. I emailed him everything. The HOA's $1,000 a day threat if I bought the house next door, my reply, Devin's lawyer letter, the board's half-hearted walkback, and the old HOA MISC nonsense documents I'd found in the blue house. 2 days later, the board proved Devin right about them not being smart. A thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. Revised assessment schedule. According to the cover letter, my recent actions had required legal counsel and emergency meetings, so they were adding a $500 per month administrative impact fee to my account. Not a fine, they insisted, just recouping costs. My name was highlighted beside the new charge. They were literally billing me for defending myself. I laughed, took a picture, and texted Devin. "They just raised the stakes." He called immediately. "They can't do this," he said. "It's retaliation in writing, based on recent actions, and seek legal counsel is basically a confession. Send it to the state and keep every scrap of paper." News of the fee spread down our little street. People walked their dogs slower, glancing at my unit and the board members' doors. Raya came over waving the letter. "They're charging you because you hired a lawyer?" she asked. "Apparently I'm a burden now," I said. "You're not the burden," she shot back. "They are." Missy showed up with cookies and an eye roll. They'd once threatened her over a simple safety railing until her son mentioned an attorney. Once we started asking, more stories spilled out. A fine over a kiddie pool visible from the street, tomato plants measured like contraband, a wheelchair ramp called an aesthetic problem. I filled a legal pad with names, dates, and amounts. "They think you're a burden for making them follow their own rules," Raya said. "Let's show them what a real burden looks like. Organized neighbors." Our documents said 20% of owners could demand a special meeting and recall vote. So we gathered 50 signatures in 3 days and submitted a bland by-the-book petition. The board posted their answer by the mailboxes. The petition was invalid due to certain procedural deficiencies, so there would be no special meeting. No explanation, just a warning about undermining leadership. I sent a photo to Devin. "Of course they did," he replied. "The civil code anticipated stubborn boards. The state is going to enjoy this." Gerald sounded almost pleased when I called. "Targeted assessments like mine weren't allowed," he said. "That alone was enough to act. Friends, thank you. See you soon."